Today we're going to go over how you guys are going to install your drywall, or the correct way to install your drywall. And we're going to go over some of the tools. We'll go over that a little bit more in depth as far as the finished stuff later on. But for today, we're going to concentrate on hanging drywall. You guys are going to have your project similar to this. You are going to have to calculate how much drywall you need, and that's what you're going to be given to work with. That's your first part of the project. But when you get to the point of where you're going to cut it, first thing you're going to do, and I'm going to try to lay this down so the camera can pick it up a little bit better, but you're going to take your measurements. One thing you'll find with drywall, it always tends to grow. If you cut a piece, if you measure across, you're going to put a ceiling piece up, and you measure from end to end, and it measures 12 foot right on the money, and you try to put 12 foot in there, it isn't going to go. It tends to grow once you cut it because you don't get everything cleaned off. You're better off leaving it a little bit loose. So a good rule of thumb is 1/4 inch small of what it measures is a good way to cut it. So I got 19 3/4, so I can cut this 19 1/2. When you're dealing with a floor, anytime your drywall comes down to a floor, you don't want your drywall right down to that floor. Rule of thumb is keep it up about 1/2 inch. So here we have 17 1/2, so I can cut that about 17. Okay, so I got 17 by what? 19 1/2. Okay. So I'm going to cut this off. When you guys make your cuts, first thing you're going to want to do is look at what somebody else's cut was on the board and make sure it's fairly good. If it's really crooked, you might want to straighten it up before you even start. And I had a drywall square here. So this is your 4-foot square, or your drywall square. Set it on there. You can kind of see if that's straight or not. Now, you can see that that's a little bit off down there at the bottom. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's not very square, the cut. Another thing about these squares, I seen Frank, he was kind of holding it like this. That wasn't hurting anything. When you guys use these, do not set this up against something like this, because this goes crashing down and then it's all bent. Okay, it's out of square. Please set these down on the floor like this so they don't get knocked over, okay? Because I don't want to replace them. So I'm going to go move down to here to this other end, because this is a factory and I know it's square. So we're going to put our measurement on there using a pencil. I know in that movie they showed you just using their knife. Better off marking something that you can see good. So I'm going to cut 17 here, so I'm going to mark 17. You do not need to draw a line clean down that to be able to cut it. You get your square on there. I'm left-handed, so I always tend to want to cut on this side of my square. Right-handers generally want to cut on this side of your square. Just like the movie showed you, you're going to pinch it right here at the top. So it can't move, and hold the bottom with your toe here. Now, you don't want to cut your drywall flat on the table or try to lay this down on the floor. You want to cut it in an upright position like this. Everybody has their own little way of doing it. I usually cut just a little bit here, starting down, and then I come down to the bottom, and that's just what's comfortable for me. Everybody's a little bit different. But like they said, you don't have to cut all the way through it. You score that. And then if you get behind it, bump that a little bit, it'll fold right where that is. Now I'm going to spin this around so you can see a little bit better. You can see a nice little line there that you have to cut this back of this paper. There you go again, just like the movie said. Always make your first cut on the face. This is back, this is face. Whenever possible, you want to cut the face first. So same thing, I usually cut just a little bit there and up this. Now, depending on how deep you score that with your knife, how sharp your knife is, it doesn't always come out perfectly smooth here. And they showed you using a rasp, a drywall rasp, which is this right here. Kind of looks like a cheese grater. This will help straighten some of your cuts up. A lot of times it'll leave like some hunks sticking out. And you just take this down through there. You can clean that right up, breaking that along there, just like that. Also, if you got a piece up and it's a little bit too tight, you can shave a little bit off. Now it works really good where you've cut. But if you try to scrape on a tapered seam, that paper wraps around, you don't want to clean that up really good at all. Usually you have to cut those. Back to that though, looking at your piece, we had talked about, and you've seen on the movie where this is the tapered cut. You can feel it kind of dips in there, and this is flat here on the edge, even on the factory. So this is a butt seam here, and this would be the tapered seam. Okay, so I got one cut made. I'm going to go ahead and make the other one. Your pieces are going to be smaller, so you can, once you get it cut off the piece, use the table to lay it on to make your second cut. And my second cut was what? 19.5. So I'm going to mark that. You could use a framing square for this. We're kind of limited on the amount of these we had. So if it takes switching to a framing square, that's fine. You can do that also. There you go again. You don't need a pencil mark across there. So you're gonna make your cut same way, holding your square, knife across there, bend and snap it, knife back up that cut there. So now you're to the point where you're going to have some electrical boxes to cut around. What I don't want to see, because you wouldn't be able to do this if you were drywalling a house, is try to hold this up there, mark the outside of your box so you don't have to do no measuring, and then cut that. For one thing, you would be cutting it from the wrong side, okay, and you don't ever want to do that, because what it's going to do is rip this face paper. So I believe in my directions I have you applying this piece first and getting it on there before you even put this piece on. Okay. So I want you to go through the process of measuring. Later on we will use, and you've seen in the movie, using these drywall routers to cut different. We will go through an exercise with these two, but for this project I do want you using a, what is this called? A keyhole saw or a drywall saw. I do want you using this. So you're going to have your piece. Whenever you're measuring drywall to cut things out or anything, it's a good idea to use a little drawing and mark out where you're going to cut. So you got your wall there, I've drew that, and I've got a box here. So where would I want to take my measurements from here? I could come over this way, right? Or I could come over this way. I probably wouldn't want to measure up, because remember, I'm leaving that up a ½ inch. You'd probably want to take your measurements down. One thing you have to remember though is, don't take this measurement from this end and then take the other measurement to the other side from here. Whatever you do, take them from the same point. So I'm going to measure across like this. Now here you don't want to leave it a quarter loose. Maybe a heavy 1/16. You want it fitting fairly snug, but not so tight that when you try to push it on there, it breaks it out. So I'm going to go 12 and 13/16. Other side is 15 and 3/16. Now I'll take my other measurements down, which is 6 and 9 7/8. Now these are down and these are over. So you can draw some arrows on there where you're measuring from. That way when you move to your piece, you're not going to get messed up on where you're coming from. So you can carry that piece right to wherever you're cutting. And it was over 12 and what? 13/16, 15 and 3/16. Down 6 to 9 and 7/8. So I've gotten four marks on there. So then you're just going to use your square again. Sometimes it's close enough to the edge that you can use just your speed square in your pouch. Now also they showed running their finger across there to make marks. That's fairly simple to do. You just get it to the line, the edge of this to your line, and pinch your finger there, and you can run right across there to make a square line. A lot of drywallers, rather than searching for a tool, or they'll do that because it's quicker. Okay, so now for cutting it, just want to make sure I'm not way big. A little less than 4, yes. What I was always taught when you hand, they never used to have these. Everything was done with a keyhole saw. But what happens is, it can happen on new too, but wood is not perfect. It's not always perfectly straight. If you get an older house that you're remodeling, and the walls are maybe a little bit out of plumb, the corner is, but you're taking your measurements from the corner. When you actually put that piece of drywall up there, it may hit here, but then here where your plug was straight across, there's a big old gap there, okay, because the wall wasn't straight. But if you're pulling your measurements from tight, this box hole is going to be way off, okay? So sometimes you got to do some adjusting and patching. Drywall is pretty easy to fix mistakes, so that's okay. But what I was always taught here, when you cut these out, you just kind of get your saw started in there. You can tap that on through, wiggle it back and forth so you got a little bit of sawing room. But I was always taught to take this at an angle like this, so you're making it a little bit bigger on the back side. And what happens is, if it's a little tight around your box, it's real easy to take a utility knife and trim that little bit because it's not quite as thick there. Makes it a little bit easier, especially on remodel projects. So I'm taking that at a little bit of angle outwards all the way around. So you're just going to cut it down through there. What you don't want to do is snap that out of there because it'll rip the paper. And you want to try not to rip the paper even on the back side any more than you have to, because it weakens that board. So we get that cut around, get that out of there. And we're going to set that up there. Should fit over your hole. Still keeping your 1/2 inch or roughly 1/2 inch above that. Like these pieces that I cut out, these work really nice as a gauge to keep it up that 1/2 inch when you're working with bigger pieces. That helps you keep that up off that floor, okay? So you'd have one at each end. Now for fastening, a couple different ways of fastening. We got nails and screws, right? Talked about that. Normal application for drywall is nail the perimeter, screw the centers. Now, pay close attention to your directions on your project, because that's not what I'm asking for on there, because I want you to experience both types. So there's a set of directions for that. But as far as the nailing, first thing, if this did not fit, if it was a little bit off and it was hitting your box, don't just do this. What's going to happen is this is going to bust this face out. Take the time to take it back off, trim it a little bit before you set it on there. Make sure that's fitting before you do any fastening. Nails, drywall nails, remember what they said about don't get right up here like this. You're going to bust it and it's going to have no holding power. Stay in what you can to tack that on there. So you're nailing it down But if you feel that nail head, you do not have it set good, right? You want that just below the surface. So nailing, if it does rip and it has no holding power, which happens, you have to stick another one where the board is solid then. You can't leave that like that because it won't hold. So here, same thing, packing it down. You can dent that stuff in. You want to be able to have it accept mud there, but you don't want to take it to the point where you rip this face of this paper. As far as screwing going, a couple different things. This I just wanted to show you because a lot of people have a cordless drill. A lot of people that's doing this for themselves are not going to go out and buy a drywall screw gun, okay? They're going to buy this bit here that's specially made for drywall, and it kind of sets the screw for you. I wanted to show you this, but I do not want anybody using these. I want you to use the drywall screw guns because I want to make sure everybody knows how to operate these. But I just want to show how this works. These kind of set that screw for you. So you run your screw in, and it slips at about the right point, as long as these are fairly new. These wear out, and then you got to replace this end, and they work good again. But for somebody that drywalls a lot, they're going to use a drywall screw gun. Now the way these work, this adjusts your depth of how far it's going in. So that's letting more of this bit show, so it's going to run the screw in deeper. So we're going to adjust it so we want it below the surface, but we do not want it so far that it has no holding power. So sometimes it takes running a few screws. Different hardnesses of boards will make that react different also. Like if you're remodeling, you're going into oak studs, then it's going to take a little bit more depth to be able to get it right. So don't do that. And those bits wear out too and are replaceable. So you're going to run that bit's about had it. I can't even run a gosh darn thing in. Well, you get in that closet, there's another one of these. Can't even run it in. So no, they're just laying in there all together. We'll try that one. So what these are designed to do, you run it, and that doesn't spin. So it's designed so you can keep this running, do that, and it's like a clutch system. When you put pressure here, that's when it spins, okay? Is how they're designed. That takes a lot to get used to running one of them. So if you look at that, I drew that in way too deep, okay? So that means this is set too deep, so you're just gonna back that off so not as much bit sticking out. And once you get it adjusted, it's usually pretty good. So that's not deep enough, so you gotta go deeper. Go the right way. And you want it just below the surface, so that's still just a little bit too far out. So you want it just below the surface. Once you have that set, it's pretty good. But like I said, I want everybody to go through the process. So once you're done using it, I want you to mess it up so everybody has to adjust it, so everybody goes through that process. Another thing, what did the movie talk about? You get nail and screw pops. What prevents that in the movie? What did they use prior to putting their sheet on? Anybody remember? It's kind of the same thing as a floor. What stops a floor from squeaking? Glue, right? There's a special glue that you buy for this tube, drywall adhesive, drywall glue. You would put it on your studs, all your framework before you put the board on there, then fasten it, then put your fasteners in. And that keeps that from getting nail pops. Has any of you in your house see spots on your wall where like the drywall mud is cracked out from these? Okay, and that's called a nail pop or a screw pop. A lot of times, not saying it won't happen if you glue, but not as many. Another thing they talked about was if you miss. So we know there's a stud out here. We didn't mark it, right? So we don't know where it's at. So say you come along here and you pound a nail in and you missed, okay? I've seen people kind of pound that in, mud over that, but what happens is that for sure is gonna probably pop later on. Doesn't matter if it's a screw or a nail. So you can take a head of a nail when you do that and pop that back out of there without too much damage. Same way with a screw, back a screw out to get it out of there so you don't get those nail pops later. One thing about this though, I mean, if you rubbed your finger across there, there's a little burr there, okay? Anytime there's something like that and you try to mud over it, it keeps building out. It don't cover good. So anything like that, you always want to dent that a little bit in so it accepts some mud there to patch that, okay? Anybody have any questions with any of that? You do, Frank? Okay. Did you get that out of there? Was that the bad one?
Yeah, how do I get it out?
It pulls really hard. That cone should come off too.
This?
Yeah, I'm not sure on these which part comes off, but usually you can get that cone off. Might have to grab it with a pair of pliers. They stick in there pretty good.
How would you do it if there's a circular, like
That's a good question because you guys will have a circular one, right? Couple different things you can do for a circle box. Over here, I don't have a circle, but I got an octagon, but we can treat it like a circle box to explain it. One method would be when you take your measurements, measure right to center and right to center, and then use a compass to mark it. That's one way. Another way is to find your edges. So you'd measure over to this edge, the farthest out point, farthest out point, farthest out point, farthest out point. And if you mark that on their square, it would leave a square box, right? And then, I'm gonna unclip this so I can go grab one. Then take a circular box. So if you had this mounted in your wall and you took these measurements, say that's mounted on there, you took the measurement to this point, to this point, this point, this point, and then drew that square on there. Then if you lay another box down on that square till it meets those lines, then just draw around it. That's probably the easiest way to mark those. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So as far as hanging drywall, that's what we're gonna go over now. I do hope we get out to the house out back here where we can actually together drywall a room so you can see, because there's a lot more to it than what we're showing here. Things that we can't really incorporate on something small like this. So nailing or screwing, what should the edges be fastened? Frank, how far apart?
I have a question.
Okay.
Are we drywall on the top here too?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay.
What you're going to do with your project, you're going to drywall this side, and all these sides, okay? Then we are going to corner bead, that metal corner bead around the edges, which I'm not going to go over today how to do it. We'll do it one step at a time. First, just hang in the drywall. But yes, you are going to. Back to fastening though, on edges, what should they be fastened apart? Does anybody remember from the movie yesterday?
Sorry, ask it one more time.
6 to 8 inches apart, yes. 6 to 8 inches apart. We will put one double set out in the middle of a stud, whether it's nails or screws, okay, for as small as our project is. But it should be, out in the center, should be double sets of what? How far apart? 1 foot, yes. So we have that. I kind of just want to go over some of the other tools. This is a drywall saw, kind of like they had a little bit heavier one that they were going around door openings with. Another thing, when we do get to this project, which we'll go over a little bit more in depth, with these drywall routers, normally you'll have a couple of them set up when you're doing a job. It has, you can notice there's a small bit, that's an 1/8 inch bit, and then we got a bigger bit, which is a 1/4 inch bit. The 1/8 inch bit is made for going around boxes, electrical boxes. The big bit is made for cutting out door openings or window openings, or any kind of big opening like that. If you use this around windows and doors, the 1/8 inch bit, you'll keep breaking them. These are $1.50 a piece. If you make one little cut and it costs you $1.50 and you just keep doing that plus the time of changing it, it's kind of aggravating. Okay, so this will cut. I've cut, I don't know, probably drywalled 25 houses with one bit and never broke one of these. You know, you don't break these very often. Yes.
Now, do you, because on the video it said that we don't cover up doors, and you just...
Yeah, you drywall over them, but then you cut them out. Remember what they talked about when you're drywalling a room. Say you're going to drywall around this window. You run your drywall through this, maybe not all the way, but you want to break it out here someplace in the center over the header. If you break it over these edges, right here at the edge of the window, and try to piece it in above, that'll always crack out right there, because that's right where something wants to settle, right at where that header meets the edge. And if you have two separate pieces of drywall there, and just a little bit of movement, that seam's going to crack right out. But if you had solid drywall through there, it won't tend to crack out there. Does anybody notice that in a house where there's cracks right up at the edge of a window or a door, ever? I mean, you see it a lot because a lot of people will break their drywall right there, and that's where it'll crack out every time, pretty much. So, if it is broke there. So these are drywall routers. We will go over these a little bit more in depth. We have a little project where I want you to learn how to use these, but I don't want it done on our walls.